Hi, it's Mrs. Francis here, and today we're going to be looking at all the different methods you can use to solve a quadratic equation. And the first one is to solve by graphing. So what we would do is put this into our calculator and view the zeros on the graph. Now, if you just tried to factor it, you would get the zeros pretty easily. But if you wanted to confirm, or if you had a more difficult quadratic, you could put this into your calculator. You'd go to y equals first and enter in the quadratic. And if you do zoom 6, you can see the graph, and it does look like it's at 5 and -1, but we'll just confirm it. You would go to second trace to bring up the 0. And when you get this screen, it's going to ask you to move your little spider to the left of the 0 you want to find. So you'd move it there and hit enter. Then we'd move the spider to the right of the 0 we want to find and hit enter. When we see the guess screen, we're going to hit enter. And then it'll give you the 0 you were trying to find. And you would have to do that again to get x equals 5. We also know how to solve quadratics by factoring. If we have a leading coefficient of 1, they're pretty easy to factor. The solutions here are 3 and 2, and obviously if we have real solutions, it's going to show up on the graph as x-intercepts. We also have looked at solving by factoring with leading coefficient other than 1, and we've been using this fun video reference on the internet called the Kung Fu trick. And you would multiply 6 and -4 to get -24, and then we factor that easier quadratic. At that point, we're going to divide by the original leading coefficient. We'll simplify. 8/6 becomes 4/3, and 3/6 becomes a half. And then we would bring the 3 up in front and the 2 up in front, and now we have our factors. And if we solve that, we get our solution is 4/3 and -1/2. And again, because we have real solutions, they're going to show up on the graph of the coordinate plane. Now we could also use the quadratic formula. We input our a, b, and c values into our quadratic formula. We simplify it. And in this case, we got -3 plus or minus I, which means that we don't have any real zeros, so the graph is not crossing the x-axis. It's above it. In this case, it's above it, and it does not cross. Now, we can also use another method called solving by finding the square roots. So if you look at this quadratic, you may notice that this is the difference of 2 squares. And if we solve that, we're going to get 5 and -5. Another way you could approach it is since we have a perfect square here, we could move the 25 to the other side, then take the square root of both sides. And when we do that, we're going to end up with x equals plus or minus 5. So it's just another approach that you can use when you notice that you have perfect squares. Now the last one is solving by completing the square, and then you would use the finding the square root technique. So here we have one that is not easily factorable. So we're going to try to complete the square. And the first thing you want to do is you want to move that constant over to the right. And then we're going to find the completing the square number. So that's going to be b divided by 2 squared. And b is -8. So we have -8 divided by 2 squared, which gives us -4 squared, which leaves us with 16. So we're going to add 16 to both sides. And remember, what you do on the left, you're going to also have to do on the right. Now here's where it gets a little tricky and can confuse people at times. This left side has now become a perfect square trinomial. So we could rewrite that as x minus 4, x minus 4. And notice we did -20 plus 16 here, and we got -4. That can be rewritten as x minus 4 squared equals -4. And now we can use the finding the square roots method. We take the square root of both sides. We get x minus 4 equals plus or minus 2i. And then to solve for x, just move the 4 over. So we get 4 plus or minus 2i. And again, this one's an imaginary. has two imaginary solutions, so we won't have any x-intercepts. All right, there's a lot to this video. You may need to watch some of it again or pause the slides. Good luck.